A fork slipped from someone's hand and clattered against a plate. That sharp little sound cut through the room before anyone dared to speak. I looked up from my napkin and saw Caroline leaning back in her chair, one heel hooked against the leg of the table, as if she owned the entire evening. The stem of her wine glass wobbled in her fingers, a thin ring of red, staining the linen she didn't bother to notice. Noah sat 2 seats down from her, shoulders drawn in, hands locked together so tightly the tendons strained along his wrists. He tried to keep his voice even as he made his point, but Caroline wasn't listening to points. She was listening for opportunities to wound. She always did when she'd had more than 2 glasses. Their voices rose an inch too loud, brushing past the rest of us like a draft that kept getting colder. I watched Noah inhale, try again, offer her a softer tone, a gentler angle. It didn't matter. Caroline lifted her glass and set it down hard enough to rattle the salt shaker. "Please," she said with a smirk that carried more venom than volume. "I'm not about to argue with a man who's 22 and still, well, everyone knows." Silence collapsed across the table. Noah froze, his jaw trembling the way it did when he was trying not to shrink. I felt something in me tighten, not anger, a different kind of ache, the kind you feel when someone kicks the smallest dog in the room just because they can. I set my fork down and looked straight at her. "Caroline," I said, "that's enough." The room felt too bright after that. Overhead lights washed every face into stiff, uneasy shapes as conversations died mid-sentence. Even the youngest cousin stopped fidgeting, sensing something grown-ups couldn't hide. Across the table, Walter lifted his glass halfway, then lowered it again when he realized no one else was breathing normally. His eyes darted to his wife, searching her face for some signal that made sense of what she'd just said. Caroline didn't offer him any. She just rolled her shoulders back, as if the whole exchange bored her. Noah swallowed hard. The sound carried farther than it should have. He kept his gaze pinned to the edge of his plate, the muscles in his neck tightening one by one, like someone bracing for another blow. I saw Jillian glance at him, worry flickering before she caught herself and looked away. Caroline reached for the bread basket with an annoyed sigh. "What? It's not a secret," she muttered, voice flat with dismissal. "He's fine. He can take a joke." The cruelty wasn't in the words. It was in the ease, the absolute casualness of it. A chair scraped behind me as one of the uncles shifted, uncomfortable. My chest tightened at the small sound. A grown man couldn't move an inch without revealing how wrong this all felt. I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady even as my pulse thudded against my ribs. "You crossed a line," I told her, "and you know you did." Caroline didn't look at me. She pulled apart a piece of bread instead, crumbs falling onto the table like she couldn't hear a word. But she heard me. Her shoulders stiffened just enough to betray it. "No one asked for your opinion, Margaret." Caroline's voice sliced through the room before I even leaned back in my chair. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. The quiet contempt carried farther than shouting ever could. I stayed still. "You embarrassed him," I said, "in front of everyone." She scoffed, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. "He embarrassed himself. I'm just the only one honest enough to say it." A brittle laugh slipped from someone near the kids' table, then died instantly when they realized no one else found this amusing. Noah didn't lift his head. His fingers dug into the napkin on his lap, twisting it until the fabric bunched into knots. Walter shifted beside her. "Caroline," he murmured, a warning buried under his breath. "What?" she snapped, eyes flashing toward him. "He knows it's true." The air thickened. Not angry yet, just ripe, like the moment right before a storm decides whether to break. Jillian set down her glass a little too fast. The soft clink was enough to make every aunt and uncle around her stiffen. "Caroline, stop," she whispered. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" Caroline's laugh was sharp and humorless. "He's a grown man. If he's that sensitive, maybe someone should finally tell him the truth." Noah flinched, And that was the whiplash moment, the one where all the forced politeness in the room snapped clean in half. Even I felt my breath stumble. Some people looked at Carolyn, some looked at Noah, but most looked at her husband, and Walter's expression had shifted. Slightly, but enough. Walter's chair scraped backward as he stood, the legs dragging across the hardwood with a low groan that made several people wince. He placed both hands on the table, fingers splayed, knuckles whitening. Not anger, not yet. More like a man realizing something he wished he could unhear. Caroline didn't notice, or she pretended not to. She reached for her wine again, swirling it with a careless flick of her wrist. Across from her, Noah shrank an inch deeper into himself. His shoulders curled in as if trying to fold into the space between his ribs. The humiliation wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It was the kind that seeps under the skin, slow and burning. "Sit down, Walter," Caroline muttered, eyes fixed on her glass. "You're making this dramatic." He didn't sit. One of the cousins whispered, "Is she serious?" Another nudged him to be quiet. No one breathed evenly. I watched Caroline tap her nails on the stem of her glass, one by one, rhythm sharp enough to fray nerves. Jillian's gaze flicked to me, wide, pleading. She wanted someone older, someone steadier to steady the entire room. I exhaled slowly, steadying my voice before speaking. "You owe him an apology." Caroline barked out a laugh. "For stating a fact?" "For humiliating him," I replied, "and you know it." She turned then, snapping her head in my direction so fast the earring on her left ear swung forward. There it was, the real look, cold, defensive, cornered. "Stay out of it, Margaret." My heartbeat thudded once, deep and heavy. "I won't," I said. Caroline's jaw clenched, and that tiny shift, so small most missed it, pulled the first real crack across the night. A thin strand of steam rose from the serving dishes between us, curling upward like it was trying to slip out of the room before everything broke. The mashed potatoes had gone cold. The roast sat untouched. Even the candles looked smaller than they had an hour ago. Noah didn't move. He stared at the tablecloth as if it could swallow him. His shame filled the space so completely that every aunt and uncle tried to look anywhere else, at their plates, their hands, the far wall, anything but at him. Caroline finally lifted her eyes, fixing them on me with a stare that didn't blink. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said. "He can't go through life being coddled." "That's not what this is," I answered. "And you know it." She scoffed again, louder this time. "Oh, come on, everyone here knows. I just said what no one else wanted to." Walter's head snapped toward her, a muscle ticking along his jaw. "Everyone?" His voice was quiet, too quiet. "What exactly does everyone know, Caroline?" The question dropped into the silence like a stone. Caroline hesitated, just half a second. But hesitation from a woman like her was a confession. Jillian set her napkin down, fingers trembling. "Caroline, stop talking." But Caroline pushed on, voice sharp enough to cut. If Noah's choices, or lack of choices, are fair game, then nothing about this family should be off limits. Noah flinched again the second time that evening, his breath caught in the back of his throat. And that was when I felt it. The shift. The change in the room, the moment where defensiveness turned into something meaner, something that wasn't going to stay contained. A glass clinked sharply against a plate, not loud but jarring enough that several heads turned at once. Someone had tried to take a sip of water with a shaking hand, and the rim scraped the porcelain. Small sounds become enormous when a room is holding its breath. Caroline barely looked up. "What?" she said, spreading her hands. "If people want to dig into personal lives, I'm not the only one with something to hide." Walter's posture stiffened. His eyes narrowed, not in anger but in calculation, like he was pulling apart her words one by one. "Hide?" he repeated. Who's hiding what, Caroline? Her smirk faltered. Jillian whispered, "Please don't do this." But her plea just floated in the air, thin and hopeless. Noah finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were glassy, rimmed with humiliation, but there was something else there too. Hurt that had been sitting quietly for years. Hurt that Caroline kept feeding. And Caroline, unable to leave anything alone, leaned forward. "You're all acting shocked. You know what he is." "You know what I was." Her words stopped there. A cliff she hadn't intended to expose. Walter's breath hitched. "What you were?" he asked, voice tightening. "What exactly were you, Caroline?" The room coiled. Every cousin, every aunt, every uncle leaned an imperceptible inch closer without meaning to. Caroline blinked once, twice, as if she could swallow the mistake back down. I watched her chest rise, fall, falter, because for the first time that evening, Caroline Pierce looked afraid of her own mouth. My breath caught before I meant it to. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. The kind that hits when a truth is about to come loose even though no one invited it. Across the table, Walter straightened, his shoulders rising a fraction as he braced himself. Caroline's fingers twitched against her napkin. A tiny movement, almost invisible. But her tells were never loud. "Don't look at me like that," she snapped. "I didn't say anything wrong." "You said enough," Walter replied. Noah shifted, scraping his chair a few inches backward, the sound brittle as cracked ice. He didn't want to witness what was coming, not with all the eyes in the room already pinning him down. His humiliation lingered, thick and sour, a reminder that Caroline had opened a wound he'd tried for years to hide. Jillian pressed a hand to her forehead. "Caroline, please, just stop talking." But Caroline pushed through the plea like she didn't hear it. Everyone here knows things about everyone else. If he can handle being called what he is, then the rest of us can handle what? Walter's voice cut in, low and rough. "What is it you think you've been so transparent about?" His question landed harder than he intended. Even I felt the sting. Caroline's throat bobbed once. She glanced around the table, searching for an ally, a buffer, a way out. No one moved, and that silence, unyielding, unflinching, backed her into a corner that she had built herself. Her next breath shook. The first real crack split wide. Walter stepped around his chair, slow and deliberate, as if each inch of movement scraped the tension tighter. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The way he stood beside Caroline, close enough to be a husband, distant enough to be a stranger, was louder than anything he could have said. Caroline's eyes tracked his movement with a stiffness I'd never seen in her. She tried to sit taller, but her spine wavered under the weight of her own words. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she muttered. Walter leaned forward slightly. "Then explain it. Explain what you meant when you said you were not the only one." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. That silence humiliated her more than any insult could have. A woman who prided herself on control, on sharpness, on knowing exactly where to stab, now choking on the tip of her own blade. One of the uncles shifted in his seat, whispering, "This isn't good," as if the room wasn't already bracing for the collapse. Noah pushed a hand through his hair, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just drop it, please." But the plea didn't save anyone. It simply exposed the bruise under his words. Caroline snapped toward him. "Oh, now you want things kept private?" That line landed wrong. Cruel wrong. The kind of wrong that makes even the most detached relatives recoil. Jillian pressed her lips together, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "Caroline," she breathed, "you're hurting everyone." Caroline swallowed hard. Her face tightened. Her mask slipped. It was the first moment she realized this time she wasn't the one holding the room. It struck me then how many times I'd seen this pattern. Caroline pushing, someone else folding, holidays, birthdays, Sunday dinners. The details changed, but the ache stayed the same. She'd jab, then laugh, then act offended when the wound bled. And Noah, He'd always shrink, always take it, always pretend it didn't land. Tonight was different. Tonight, there was nowhere for him to disappear. Noah tried to stand, but his foot caught the leg of his chair, sending it skidding an inch across the floor. The sound sliced through the silence like a misstep on a stage. A few cousins winced. One aunt looked down as if the embarrassment might splash onto her. Caroline huffed. "Oh, look at him. Can't even walk without—" "Stop!" My voice cut through hers before she could finish the sentence. She turned on me, eyes wide with insult. "Why are you all acting like he's fragile?" Because he was being humiliated. Because she knew it. Because she liked the power of it. Noah lifted his face, eyes wet, jaw tightening with a shame so deep it made my own throat sting. The humiliation wrapped around him like a heavy coat he couldn't shed. "I'm fine," he whispered, but he wasn't. Everyone could see it. Walter stared at his wife as if seeing her with new eyes. "Why would you say something like that to him?" Caroline's lips parted. Her voice trembled before she steadied it. "Because it's true." And that was the moment the room turned. Not loudly, not with shouting, but with a collective recoil. A recognition that she had crossed a line she couldn't claim she didn't see. The gravy ladle tipped inside its dish, metal tapping porcelain in a slow, uneasy rhythm every time someone shifted. That tiny sound marked each second we sat, suspended between what had already been said and what couldn't be swallowed back. Caroline lifted her chin, trying to recover her posture. "Everyone here is acting like I committed a crime. I made a comment. That's all." "A comment meant to embarrass him," I said. "You knew exactly what you were doing." She shook her head with a tight, mocking smile. "If he can't handle the truth—" "It wasn't truth," Walter cut in. His tone was controlled, but the strain beneath it was unmistakable. It was cruelty. Caroline froze, eyes narrowing in disbelief. "You're taking their side?" "I'm taking the side of decency," he replied. Her breath hitched, barely, but it was enough to reveal where the hit landed. Noah rubbed a hand across his mouth, trying to hide how red his eyes had become. A cousin muttered something under his breath, a quiet, stunned wow that carried across the table. Caroline heard it. Her pride flared. "You're all judging me," she snapped, "like none of you have anything you wouldn't want aired out." Jillian whispered, "Caroline, please." But Caroline talked right over her. "If someone wants to talk about secrets, we can talk about secrets. I'm not the only one with a past that would shock a spouse." The words spilled too fast, too loud, too revealing. Walter's hand tightened on the back of his chair. "What past?" he asked. And just like that, humiliation shifted. This time, the spotlight turned toward her. Silence pressed so hard against the room that even the air felt thinner. No chairs moved, no cutlery shifted. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Every eye fixed on Caroline as if the wrong blink might shatter the moment into something unrepairable. Caroline swallowed, the sound sharp in the quiet. "Don't twist my words," she said. "I didn't mean anything by it." Walter didn't budge. "You meant enough to make me question what you're hiding." A ripple of discomfort rolled through the table. An uncle coughed. An aunt reached for her water, then froze halfway when she felt how badly her hand trembled. Caroline's face flushed a dark, uneven crimson. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're blowing one joke out of proportion." "A joke at Noah's expense," I said quietly. "And now you're scrambling." She glared at me with a heat she used to reserve for strangers, not family. "Stay out of this." But this wasn't about me. Or Noah. Not anymore. Walter stepped closer to her chair. "Caroline, what past are you talking about? What exactly would shock a spouse?" Her breath stuttered. That tiny, involuntary hitch was the kind that tells truths before words do. Jillian stared at her sister, eyes wide with dread. "Caroline, don't." Caroline shifted her gaze, scanning faces around the table. She looked for rescue. Someone to give her a ladder out of the hole she'd just dug. No one moved. And in that stillness, every mask she'd worn all night began to slip. She looked cornered, and she was. A tremor rippled through Caroline's hands before she hid them under the table. Her shoulders lifted on a shallow inhale, the kind someone takes when they're trying not to crack open. But the crack was already forming. Everyone could see it. Walter kept his gaze locked on her, not harsh, not shouting, just steady in a way that stripped her defenses bare. "Caroline," he said, "tell me what you meant." She opened her mouth, but her breath stuttered halfway out. I wasn't. Her voice fractured, the sharp edge she leaned on all night finally giving way. "This is not something we need to discuss here." "That's exactly why we need to," Walter replied, quiet but immovable. Jillian reached for her sister's arm. "Caroline, stop before this gets worse." But Caroline jerked away, the motion too quick, too panicked. Her chair legs scraped against the floor, loud enough to make Noah flinch. "Everyone here knows my past," she said, each word trembling despite her attempt to steady them. "They've always known. So don't act shocked now." Walter's face changed. Not anger, not disgust, realization. He took a slow step back, as if distance might help him hear what she wasn't saying. "You told me," he said, voice low, "that you'd only been with a few men before we met." Caroline's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes darted away. A murmur rolled through the table. No judgment, no cruelty, just the quiet, undeniable sound of truth settling where lies used to sit. And for the first time all night, Caroline Pierce was the one who looked small. Walter backed away from the table, one slow step at a time, as though the floor beneath him had shifted. His hand brushed the edge of a serving tray, rattling the silverware against the metal. The sound jolted through the room like a warning none of us were prepared for. Caroline stared at him, eyes wide, lips parted but unable to form a defense. Her confidence, so loud, so heavy minutes earlier, seemed to drain from her body all at once. "Walter," she whispered, "please don't do this here." He shook his head. "You did this here." Noah lowered his gaze again, guilt flickering across his expression even though he had done nothing wrong. Humiliation had a way of clinging to the quiet ones, even when they weren't the ones causing the harm. Caroline pushed her chair back and stood. Her knees wobbled before she steadied herself. "I didn't lie," she said. "Not exactly." Walter's voice cracked. "You told me you had a normal past. You said there wasn't anything I should be blindsided by." Caroline's breath broke on the inhale. "I didn't think it mattered anymore." "It matters when you hide it," Walter replied. Around us, relatives shifted uncomfortably. A few looked toward the door. One aunt pressed a hand to her chest, whispering something too soft to catch. Caroline's eyes pooled, not with softness, but with panic. She glanced at Noah, at Jillian, then finally at me, as if hoping someone might shield her from the words she'd unleashed. But this was a collapse she had built herself, and nothing in the room could hold it up. The scent of the roast, pepper, thyme, something warm that had filled the house an hour earlier, turned heavy in my throat. It no longer smelled like a family meal. It smelled like something burning slow, something past saving. Even the candles along the table sputtered as if they felt the shift. Caroline pressed her palms against the back of her chair, grounding herself the way someone does when the room won't stay still. "Walter," she murmured, "we can talk about this later." "We won't," he answered, "because later is what you've been using to avoid the truth." Her lips trembled. "I didn't avoid anything. I didn't want my past to define me." Noah let out a shaky breath, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Shame still weighed on him from Caroline's earlier words, but now something else flickered behind his eyes, a bitter recognition. The kind people feel when they realize pain was never one-sided. Jillian looked devastated. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "Caroline, Why didn't you tell him? You told all of us years ago." Caroline's head snapped toward her. "Because you weren't going to judge me. He would have. They always do." Her voice broke on that last line, revealing a wound she never dared show. Walter's face softened for a fleeting second, grief more than anger, but the moment vanished as quickly as it came. "I'm not angry at your past," he said. "I'm angry that you lied." Caroline flinched hard, almost as if he'd struck her. And in that instant, the collapse wasn't just hers. It spilled into every corner of the room, touching anyone who'd ever hidden a truth to feel worthy. Noah's thumb traced the frayed edge of his napkin, a small, unconscious motion that carried more ache than any outburst could. His humiliation still lingered in the air, but now it mixed with something heavier, something that no longer belonged only to him. Caroline's breathing turned uneven. "You don't understand," she whispered, eyes darting between Walter and the rest of us. "People judged me for years. I didn't want my marriage to start with that." Walter's jaw clenched. "I didn't judge you. I trusted you." She shook her head, a jerky, frightened movement. "You say that now, but men always change once they know. They look at you different. They love you different." "That's not why I'm hurt," he replied. "I'm hurt because you decided I couldn't handle your truth." The room stayed painfully still. Even the younger cousins sensed the shift to something raw, something fragile. Jillian wiped beneath her eye. "Caroline, this wasn't about protecting yourself tonight. You humiliated Noah to protect your image." Caroline's stare snapped toward her sister, wounded and defensive. No, that's not." "It is," Jillian whispered. "You lashed out to make sure no one looked too closely at you." A gasp rolled across the table. Caroline backed up a step, then another. Her heel bumped into the wall, stopping her escape. Panic rippled through her posture. "I made mistakes," she said, voice cracking, "but I didn't deserve to be exposed." Walter's silence answered her more clearly than words could. She sank slightly, just enough for us to see it. The moment she realized the truth wasn't what doomed her. The hiding did. A chair leg scraped behind me as someone shifted, the noise sharp enough to slice through Caroline's trembling words. It echoed in the tight room, reminding everyone that we were no longer just witnesses. We were standing inside the fallout. Caroline pressed her palms flat against the wall behind her, chest rising too fast. "I didn't lie," she insisted, though her voice shook on the last word. "I just didn't tell him everything." Walter let out a long exhale, one hand gripping the back of his chair as though steadying himself. "Marriage is built on everything," he said quietly. "Not the parts you choose." She shut her eyes, face tightening as if the sentence struck her physically. Noah shifted, his voice fragile. "You didn't have to drag me into this to protect yourself." Caroline's eyes flew open. "I wasn't protecting myself. I was—" She stopped, the sentence collapsing mid-air. "I was angry, and I said something I shouldn't have." "You said it to humiliate him," I replied. "And you said it because you were scared." Her gaze darted to me. "Scared of what?" The truth catching up. A few relatives murmured under their breath, but no one defended her. Not because they hated her, because they recognized the thing she was running from. Caroline's shoulders dropped. All that sharpness, all that swagger drained into a small, exhausted slump. "I didn't think he needed to know everything," she whispered. Walter straightened slowly. "But I did." Those 3 words cracked whatever composure she still had, and the room felt the shift. A pivot from collapse to something sharper, something that would not stay buried anymore. "Tell me the truth, Caroline." Walter's voice was steady, but the steadiness was the kind that comes right before something breaks. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't pleading. He was asking for honesty in front of the very people she'd spent years performing for. Caroline's breath hitched. "Not here," she murmured. "Please, not in front of them." Jillian stepped forward, voice barely above a whisper. "You started this in front of them." Caroline winced, the truth landing harder than any insult. Across the table, Noah lowered his gaze again. A part of him wanted to disappear, but another part, small, wounded, tired, wanted to watch her face what she had made him endure. Walter straightened. "How many, Carolyn?" The room froze. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hesitate between seconds. Caroline's lips parted, closed, parted again. Her hands shook so visibly she pulled them to her chest just to hide the trembling. "It was a long time ago," she whispered. "That isn't an answer." Her eyes glistened. She looked at her husband as if searching for a version of him who wouldn't ask the question, the version she relied on, the version she performed for. It was more than I told you. How much more? She backed into the corner of the room, shoulders drawing tight. A lot. Walter's jaw twitched. Not rage, realization, a painful, quiet recognition of a truth he'd never been allowed to hold. Around us, cousins shifted, shocked but silent. An aunt covered her mouth, and Caroline Pierce, who had humiliated her brother minutes ago, now trembled under the weight of her own secrets being pulled into the light. This was the moment the confrontation stopped circling and finally struck its center. The candle nearest Caroline flickered violently, wax pooling at its base as if even the flame recoiled from the heat in the room. Shadows jittered across her face, catching every tremble she fought to hide. Walter stood a few feet away, arms crossed, not in defiance, but in restraint. "Give me the number," he said quietly, "or something close to it." Caroline pressed a shaking hand to her temple. "Why does it matter now? We've been married for years." "Because you lied for years," he replied. "That's the part I can't swallow." A murmur rolled through the family, uncomfortable, stunned, unwilling but unable to look away. Noah's voice came out small. "You didn't have to use me to deflect from this." Caroline's breath shuddered. "I wasn't deflecting. I was angry, Noah." "And you humiliated me," he whispered. She closed her eyes, pain flashing across her features. "I know." Walter took a step closer. "Caroline." She looked up, cornered, shaking, glassy-eyed. "Was it 10 times more than you told me?" he asked. Her chin dipped in the faintest nod. 20? She opened her mouth, but no sound came. A cousin gasped softly. Someone else muttered, "Oh my God." Walter's face shifted, a single devastating realization settling into place. Not about her past, about the scale of her deception. Caroline finally spoke, voice thin as paper. It was hundreds. The word hung there, heavy and irreversible. Gasps rippled. Someone's fork clattered. Jillian covered her mouth. Walter stepped back like the floor beneath him had dropped. And for the first time all night, Caroline didn't look angry. She looked terrified. A collective inhale swept the table, sharp and instinctive, as if the entire room had been hit at once. Even the children, too young to understand the details, felt the jolt in the adults around them and fell silent. Walter's face went still, not blank, still. The kind of stillness that comes when the world you trusted shifts an inch to the left and nothing fits where it used to. Caroline took a step forward, then stopped when she saw him flinch ever so slightly. "Walter," she whispered, "I'm not that person anymore." His voice cracked on the edge. "You didn't let me know who you were." She shook her head rapidly, panic rising from her collarbone up to her eyes. "I changed. I swear I changed. I didn't think you'd understand who I used to be." "You didn't give me the chance." The words hit harder than any accusation. Behind her, Jillian drew a trembling breath. "Caroline, you can't keep blaming fear for cruelty." Caroline blinked, stunned. "Cruelty? You humiliated Noah because you were terrified your secret would slip," Jillian said softly. You hurt him so no one would look too closely at you. Noah swallowed, his voice fragile but steady. You didn't have to protect yourself by breaking me. Caroline covered her mouth with her hand, tears filling her eyes like something inside had finally cracked under the pressure. Walter stepped back again, the distance between them widening with each breath he took. I don't care about the number, he said quietly. I care about the lie. Caroline looked like she'd been struck, and in that instant every ounce of power she held shattered, falling into the very silence she created. The distance between Walter and Caroline felt wider than the length of the dining room. It felt like another country. He stood near the doorway now. One hand braced against the frame as if he needed something solid to lean on. She stayed rooted near the table, hands trembling at her sides, eyes red and swollen. Caroline took a halting step toward him. Please don't walk away from me. I'm not walking away, he said. I'm trying to breathe. His voice was steady, but the edges frayed with each word. Caroline wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. I didn't want my past thrown in my face again. I didn't want to feel filthy. I didn't want you to see me the way other people used to. You should have trusted me not to, he replied. A beat of silence. Then another. The room braced itself. Noah shifted in his chair, eyes lowered but listening. Jillian clasped her hands as if she could hold the moment still. The aunts and uncles were frozen, some in pity, some in disbelief, all of them unable to pretend this wasn't happening in front of them. Caroline's voice cracked. I was scared you wouldn't love me if you knew the truth. Walter looked at her for a long, aching second. I'm struggling, he said. Not because of your past, but because you humiliated your own brother to protect your lie. The words hit her like a blow to the chest. She sank back a step, breath shuddering, as the room watched the final layer of her defense collapse. And there, in that fragile, brutal stillness, the real confrontation finally surfaced. The room exhaled all at once, not in relief, but in exhaustion. The kind that settles after a storm, stops throwing lightning, but hasn't finished its rain. Every face around the table carried the same stunned heaviness, the kind you feel when truth has ripped through a family gathering and left nothing where it used to be. Caroline's shoulders sagged as if something inside her had finally run out. I didn't want to lose everything, she whispered. Not over who I used to be. Walter closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. When he opened them, they were softer but distant, like he was looking at her through a doorway she'd closed years ago. You didn't lose me because of who you were, he said. You lost my trust because of who you pretended to be. Caroline covered her face with both hands. The sound she made wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, raw, a kind of wounded breath that broke the last of the tension strangling the room. Jillian moved to Noah, resting a gentle hand on his back. He stiffened at first, then leaned into it, just enough to show how deeply the night had carved into him. I'm sorry, Caroline murmured, her voice muffled through her fingers. Noah, I'm so sorry. He looked up, eyes rimmed red. You didn't need to protect yourself by tearing me down. Caroline flinched, a truth she couldn't outrun. Around us, relatives shifted, murmuring small things. Nothing judgmental, nothing harsh, just the low, aching sounds of a family trying to understand where to step next. And for the first time all night, the room felt unbearably human. Someone stood and quietly collected the unused plates at the far end of the table. The soft clatter, a small reminder that the night hadn't stopped. It had only changed shape. The motion seemed to nudge the rest of us back into our bodies, grounding us after an hour spent in free fall. Caroline lowered her hands and swiped at her cheeks. Her makeup had streaked into uneven lines, but for the first time that evening, she didn't seem to care. I never meant for any of this to happen, she whispered. Walter didn't move closer, but he didn't move farther either. Then what did you mean to happen, Caroline? She exhaled shakily. I wanted the room to look at him instead of me. That's all. Noah's throat tightened. Why me? Her gaze flicked to him, haunted, guilty. Because you never fight back. Because you swallow things. Because it was easy. Noah blinked slowly, as if the words weighed heavier than the humiliation itself. Jillian stepped between them instinctively, her voice soft. He shouldn't have to carry what you're afraid to face. Caroline nodded, the gesture small but sincere. I know. I know that now. Walter leaned a hand on the back of a chair, his voice gentler yet still bruised. You hid your truth because you feared mine. She looked up, startled. What truth? That I would have loved you anyway. Her breath trembled at that. A single fragile moment where clarity hit harder than confrontation. Around us, relatives exchanged quiet glances. Not pity, not judgment. Just the deep collective understanding of watching someone finally face the thing that's been chasing them for years. A draft slipped in from the hallway, brushing against the tablecloth just enough to make the edges flutter. It felt like the room itself exhaled after holding too much for too long, a quiet signal that the worst of the storm had finally begun to ease. Caroline wrapped her arms around herself, no longer defensive, just small. I spent so long trying to rewrite who I was, she said softly. I thought if I pretended hard enough, the past wouldn't matter. Walter listened, jaw tight but eyes weary rather than angry. Pretending doesn't erase anything, Caroline. It only pushes people away. She nodded, tears sliding down without resistance this time. I didn't trust you to love the parts of me I hated. And I didn't get the chance to try, he replied. Noah shifted, his posture less folded, less protective. He swallowed, then spoke carefully. I never judged you for your past. I just wanted you to stop using mine. Caroline looked at him with an ache that reached all the way to her voice. You didn't deserve that. I was cruel because I was scared, and that isn't an excuse. No, I said gently, but it's a beginning. Jillian rubbed Noah's shoulder once more, pride softening her face as he lifted his chin, no longer carrying the weight of her words alone. Caroline wiped her cheeks. I can fix this. I don't know how yet, but I want to. Walter's expression stayed guarded, but something inside him loosened by a thread. Trying is better than hiding. The dining room felt different then. Not healed, not whole, but finally willing to breathe again. The candles had burned low, their flames shrinking into small, steady points of light. The room no longer felt sharp around the edges. It felt tired, honest in a way families rarely allow themselves to be. Caroline stepped closer to Noah. Not too close, just enough that he didn't have to shrink to meet her. I was wrong, she said. No shaking, no defensiveness, just the plain truth. You deserved kindness. I gave you cruelty. Noah's breath wavered. I just wanted you to see me as your brother, not a target. I see you, she whispered. I see you now. Jillian looked at both of them with a mix of relief and weariness, the kind that settles after hours of holding a family together with nothing but hope. Walter exhaled, quiet and long. His expression stayed bruised, but his voice softened. I don't know where we go from here, he admitted. Caroline nodded. Wherever it is, I'll stop hiding. He didn't promise anything. He didn't walk away either. That small, fragile pause between them felt like the only honest place they could stand. The aunts and uncles began to rise, gathering coats and dishes in slow, deliberate motions, not escaping, just giving the moment space. I stayed seated a little longer, watching the family shift back into something gentler, no perfection, no neat ending. Just people trying again after breaking in front of each other. When I finally stood, the room felt different, lighter in places, heavier in others, but real in a way it hadn't been when the night began. And for once, that was enough. If you've ever been spoken to that way, feel free to share your experience.